The elites are back. The next two stops in the state of Alabama. And how far is too far to come back and make the Bassmaster Classic? That and more on episode 179 of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Ronnie Moore. My guy, like always, co-hosting with me, Kyle, Jessie, and Kyle. We're back in the swing of the Elite Series, and before you know it, our season will almost be done. We're previewing the 6th stop of the season at Wheeler, the 7th stops in just 2 weeks, and then we'll have a back-to-back in New York to wrap up the year. So, boy, we're going to talk about it today, but if you have not caught them this year in 2024, you better hurry up because you're almost out of time.
Yeah, it's funny this season, at the end of each elite season, you look back at like the first event, you think, man, that didn't even seem like it was this year. We still have 4 elites to go in the schedule, and I feel like Toledo Bend happened 6 years ago as it is right now. So excited to be back in the swing of things here in my now home state of Alabama. 2 fisheries that should show out and be unique tournaments. I mean, I think there's no questioning that. There's a lot to be determined, like you said, with AOY points, Rookie of the Year points, a lot on the line for these 2 tournaments. I think a lot of guys circled these 2, in the middle of the season as kind of being wild cards in a way, and should be entertaining for the fans.
For sure, and I'm excited about them, even though they might have been the 2 most circled and questioned, either questioned in what's going to happen or why the heck are we going there. Wheeler and Smith, those are the 2 bugaboos in between the spawn, the pre-spawn, spawn, and immediate post-spawn events in the first 2 months of the season, first 2-3 months of the season, and then we have the smallmouth swing. They're the 2 in the middle that had the big question marks. But I really like Wheeler. I've been there for an Elite Series event covering it in 2016. Obviously, we had the Open there last year. It's one that's got a couple different things. It could be, more of a one-trick pony in terms of there's not ledges galore and you can go find a place 80 miles away from someone else like you can at some of the other TVA lakes. But there is some bar fishing, some ledge fishing, because it does normally stay higher or it fluctuates with water levels. The spawn may happen a little later, so shallow fish may linger more into the summer. Really good possibilities there. Both species in play. Well, maybe all 3, I don't know, but the spotted bass population, but definitely largemouth, and we know smallmouth show up big time at Wheeler at certain times of the year. But I'm really looking forward to Wheeler. And then Smith Lake, we've never been there for the Elite Series, and we'll get to talk about that and preview that in a few weeks. But Smith's one, as somebody who loves spotted bass, I'm like the treasurer or the secretary of the Spotted Bass Club. Like, I love spotted bass. I think that one's going to give us some unique views and some different things. Definitely some extreme type fishing, whether it's extreme deep or you're fishing over deep water. You're going to have extreme wakeboard boats out there as well. That's one big reason they're not excited about it. And you can see extremely shallow in the backs of creeks or way up a river with some largemouth fishing. So that's Smith Lake. That's in a few weeks. But Wheeler, Tennessee River, and the way it flows, for those who don't know about Wheeler, if you haven't paid attention to the Elite Series since 2016 when we were last there, we were there around the end of April in a back-to-back with the Bull Shoals and Norfolk event. The next week we came down and did Wheeler. And Kyle, the way the Tennessee River flows, you've got obviously up there near Knoxville, the headwaters of the Tennessee River, Fort Loudon and Tellico. It flows down into Watts Bar. Watts Bar flows to Chickamauga. Chickamauga then goes down into Nickajack to Gunnersville, Gunnersville, Wheeler, Wilson, Pickwick, Kentucky Lake. That's the whole Tennessee River. And so right there in the middle, you've got 2 holding ponds, we can call them, in Wheeler and Wilson. And so that's one big thing in the state of Alabama. I know we get rain in Arkansas plenty, it seems, before the summer hits. What's the rain been like in Alabama? Because that is a huge factor going into this event on how much flow and how high and low the water's been before this week.
Yeah, it hasn't rained a lot. And I looked at the forecast this morning. I don't believe it was calling for rain between now and the start of the tournament. Obviously, we're recording this early on in the week, but it hasn't been a lot of rain, hasn't been sustained rain by any means. Haven't had days where it rains basically all day long. Maybe a little shower here and there, but overall, I'd say the rain and water fluctuation shouldn't be that big of a factor. Obviously, current and everything that comes along with a river type lake like Wheeler is going to be important, always going to be important. But I think that'll be pretty what's the word? I'm not thinking stage conditions, but like pretty consistent
Consistent.
conditions, you know, which is
So
which is what you're looking for in a lot of ways.
the rain, I might have phrased this poorly, but not necessarily the rain this month. But what's the rain been like this spring? Like, was it one of those places where they were funneling so much water from Gunnersville from maybe March, April, May rains that they kind of, like it probably has pushed back the stages of Wheeler just a little bit, like where other fish might start spawning in March at Gunnersville, maybe late February, something like that, that they have to hold off because the water changes so much. So yeah, I didn't know those, I guess, spawn or pre-spawn time of year, how much rain y'all got, because some of those storms clip Tennessee and they may not affect Birmingham, they may not affect Eufaula, Alabama, but like with Wheeler being so north, it's so close to Tennessee.
Yeah, it seemed like it was an above average spring as far as rain, maybe a little. Obviously, I don't have a ton to compare it to, only being here for the last few years, but it seemed
And
like it's going to be. It seemed like it was about on par, maybe a little more. We definitely had some of those severe storms that ran through Arkansas and Tennessee, like you mentioned, and especially the northern part of the state. So I would say it probably delayed the spawn a little bit, but I would say not like to the point of a noticeable change, but to your credit about Wheeler itself, I've not fished the lake, but I've covered two tournaments, I guess, there. And the one thing I will say about it is like you can run up and down the river and it looks good. Like you like the there's plenty of shoreline cover, whether it be grass, laydowns, hard cover. Um, there is a ton of vegetation and places for fish to live shallow. So I feel like it's, at least from what I can tell, it's kind of one of those lakes that I got off the phone this morning with Steve Bowman, compared it to Dardanelle in a way. Obviously, fish get offshore on Dardanelle. I mean, it's different because Tennessee River sets up far different than the Arkansas River fisheries, but it's one of those places where I think a population of fish are going to stay shallow all year round because there's almost no reason to leave. And I think we'll get to see that some this week with the Elite Series being there. But at the end of the day, it is still a Tennessee River lake, and like you said, um, where it might be a little different, the ledges, traditional ledge fishing that you see on Kentucky Lake and Gunnersville, it's a little different. There's still going to be some of that, of course, but like you mentioned earlier with the shallow bars, shallower ledges, things of that nature, it's still going to be a lot of offshore, but it just fishes a little bit different because the depths are of course, going to be a little different than your traditional ledge fishing events that you'd see, a couple of years ago in Pickwick, like I said, Gunnersville in the summertime, and like I said, Kentucky Lake back in its prime as well.
I feel like this is like a little bit of a change in the Tennessee River. Like you don't have to be an excellent offshore ledge fisherman to win at Wheeler or a Wilson. You've got the tail races, you've got current, you've got the shallow game that comes into play. It's like Gunnersville's got grass and it's got the ledges, and then you've got Pickwick, Kentucky Lake. Those are like the deeper offshore ledges, big time, big schools of fish. But that Wheeler and Wilson portion, it's like you can survive shallow. Now, 2 day tournaments, 1 day tournaments, probably a lot easier to survive shallow. 4 day gauntlets against the Elite Series. Boy, you better be on something special or have plenty of options to choose from when it comes to, I'm going to run these 4 or 5 different shallow areas. But yeah, the Decatur Flats is going to be the buzzword. I can't promise you, but I might task Such with keeping up how many times we say Decatur Flats throughout the whole week, because Decatur's our host right there, right out in front of Ingalls Harbor is the start or mid portion of the Decatur Flats, and pick a spot. It could be the best spot of the week, but getting a spot may be difficult depending on takeoff number. Somebody finds that you could be boat two, but if you're pulling to the same one cast spot that boat one pulls up to, you better have a fast boat. Even though it's so close to takeoff, you better do that. But I do. What's funny is when you said Dardanelle, there's things about it. It looks similar. It can act similar. It's definitely got some like really wooded, remote looking places. And then it's also, you've got the industrial aspects right there on the river that you see the bridges overcross, and you're like, where are we at? Um, what's funny is that they lay out almost the same, but Dardanelle, you have to go to the west to go upriver, and Wheeler, you go to the east to go upriver. Like if you're going upriver, and so they do. You got to turn your boat the opposite way, to get your nose into the current. Um, But man, when we went there in late April, obviously we expected the heat of the spawn to be going on, and this was 2016. We've had 4 Elite Series events there in the past. 2008, Jeremy Starks win over the field, but specifically over Kevin Van Dam when Jeremy Starks pulled the KVD Who out. Thought that was his kiss of death, but he wins there. Goes on to win another Elite Series event before his time is done. 2009, Tommy Biffle wins there, I believe, flipping bushes. 2011, David Walker wins there. Takahiro wins in 2016. And um, all of those have been compelling events for different reasons. And so I'm excited for this one. But in that 2016 event, we saw John Cruz. Um, he might have been, I don't know if he was the day one leader, but I remember he caught a bag up in the Elk, utilized that, ended up making a top 10. Brandon Lester had a good day one. We saw him on camera throughout the rest of the week, I think. Dave Lefebvre was who I covered, and he was flipping bushes not far from takeoff every single day. And boy, he was leading going into the final day, and really didn't have a bad final day. Takahiro just had one of those awesome comeback final days that you always can ask for. And so he did that. I think Randy Howe was in the top 10. He was on the Decatur Flats that final day as well. And so um, we had some ebbs and flows. Definitely one of the places, Kyle, I would say no one is safe if they have the lead because you just never know what Wheeler's going to throw at you the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you mentioned there, obviously with boat numbers and things of that nature, those kind of things make a tournament interesting because you have to have a game plan that's not, shallow. And I don't mean that in terms of like the depth that you're fishing. I mean that in terms of like you have to have like, plan A, B, C, D, E, all the way down the alphabet because of the way things shift and change. And that's something we saw last year in the Open there. Obviously, a month and a little bit of change, I guess, earlier in the year, but saw that a lot. I mean, you could, like you said, from takeoff, just look out onto the river and you'd see. I mean, if you had good eyes, you'd probably see three-quarters of the field, with inside of takeoff. But obviously, those spots within the spot, will flip-flop from day one to day two, especially with a larger field, like over double the field size for the Elite Series this week. So they will have that in their favor. And obviously, when certain guys fish certain areas and they establish that on day one and can work together on certain areas that can help multiple people out. But yeah, it's a compelling tournament in that regard because there's a lot of things that you have to consider as an angler. You could have a great day one, but if you don't have a solid day two plan, like that could crumble and your day one success could be a thing of the past. So it's going to be an interesting event for sure.
Or if you're a terrible person and no one wants to let you in on a spot and you're a boat 100 the next day, you're gonna be suffering. But got to talk to our friend of the show, Sam George, Opens Pro. Got a top 5 there at Wheeler, which he would call his home lake last year in the Open. He was kind of the one, that preview. We had Opens anglers come on and preview each event last year, and really they had mixed results, but he was one who started turning in the right direction for us. I think then John Garrett previewed, the Watts Bar event and had a good one. Like there's some guys who previewed these events and then had good ones, but Sam kicked it off with a top 5 there. And so I talked to him middle of last week and asked him how it was going. He said that the shallow bite was still happening, offshore bite is getting right. That these fish spawn a little later than Gunnersville and other TVA lakes due to that water fluctuation we had just talked about a few minutes ago. That actually the fishing up shallow gets better towards the end of May than in April when you would expect to go up there and start catching them. There was zero current in last year's Open, so anything better than that will help those offshore guys. And, if you find an area that has gizzard shad on it, which obviously is an X factor, bait fish, he said if you find a place that has gizzard shad on it, that's the difference from that spot turning into a 15-pound hole to turning into a 22 to 24-pound hole on the size of the fish that you're going to have show up there when those gizzard shad are present. And then I asked him this morning what the winning weight could be if my guesstimation was too high or too low. And I'll safely say I'm going to tell you my true and honest guesstimation for fantasy fishing weights when I later, but I just asked it for perspective. He said that he feels like the bite has slowed down a little bit with the current slacking back. So like you said, Kyle, not a lot of rain lately, which means it's um equalizing, like the place is settling. It's getting more consistent day to day, which means that,
Stabilizing was
yeah,
the word I was
stabilizing.
looking
That's
for earlier. I couldn't think
same,
of the word, but yeah.
looking for that same word. Um, and that because it's now stable, which I put that in big air quotes, we would think, oh, good, it's going to get better. But actually, if it was more unstable, they'd probably be generating more water. More water movement at different times of the day could mean a better bite. And so, what I hear from that is less consistent current flow or a lot more minimal current flow. Does this give the shallow guys a little bit more ammunition for the week? Obviously, shallow fish can set up with current as well, but these fish, the flats, that's going to be a factor, no doubt. But I'm saying it'll probably get one in the same place it would, or not same place, but same general type of fishing as it would if the current was flowing. But when it slows down, it opens up, hey, I can still succeed doing something else. So will we see, do you feel with less current flow, which now, less current flow, that there's still shallow fish throughout the summer and that those offshore fish were just kind of aligning? Will we see someone be able to make a top five or stay competitive shallow?
Well, I'd like to think that that's going to be the case. I mean, like I said, every tournament that I've covered out there and been there, um, it seems like the shallow bite plays a role to some degree. Like you said, all the Elite Series tournaments in the past we've seen, it's played a role. But the one thing that was eye-opening to me last year covering the Open is I actually got to cover Sam. And on the final day, that's what he did. He ran shallow stuff. I mean, shallow grass, swam a jig, fish traditional old school, fish the bank, which I did not expect to see at all based on, his knowledge of the body of water. And you just expected he was going to go offshore and catch them. Um, I think that it's
I think it was May and there was maybe a shad spawn going on a little bit here or there or whatever, but yeah, go ahead.
For sure. There absolutely was. And a lot of it was going on the bars, like the shallow bars and even submerged grass, it seemed like if I remember correctly. But I'd like to think shallow is going to play a role for sure. When you factor in those spots that we talked about that are going to get fished really hard by numerous, anglers, a guy that can find some backwater, some shallow stuff, and gets it to himself can make that last for 2 or 3 days. Which could be the key to success is having something a little bit off to the side to yourself. So I'm going to say the shallow is definitely going to play a role. I sure hope it does because, like I said, every time I've been out there, you just look around and you're like, man, this is such a beautiful place to like go fish shallow. But naturally, when you get into the middle of June, the expectations of the shallow fishing playing a major role, especially on the Tennessee River, your expectations kind of dwindle down on that. But we've seen guys do it in the past. I mean, John Cox 2 years ago at Pickwick. I mean, that was as ledge fishing of a tournament as you could ever imagine, and he still found success fishing shallow. So Wheeler, the way it sets up, what we know about it in the past, I do think that there's going to be some anglers that still catch them shallow, and I've even heard from some anglers that expect that to be a major factor as well.
It feels like there's no kept secrets or like Lee Livesey posted today on idling out of Ingles Harbor and said, never been here, never seen this place in my life. We know about the flats, we know about offshore fishing, but I'd expect it to be some shallow stuff too, and we can do that. The internet and YouTube and the word is out like that you can know what to do at bodies of water without ever fishing there, like ever fishing there. You can go to a blueback herring lake at Lake Murray and know and be clued in just by paying attention. And so, yeah, I think that that's going to be a deal. One thing that's going to be interesting is if you find a sweet spot on the Decatur Flats when there's no current flowing, maybe during the week of practice, there's no current flowing and you get a bite, you catch one with no current, you're encouraged. They could move, they could move 50 yards if you show up there and it's flowing that morning. And so someone could have a dot because they caught them on the current moving portion of practice and they're down the ledge from you, down the flat from you, and you're not getting a bite and you're wondering where, and they're hooking up every time. All your fish that were just wandering the top of the flat, maybe they wandered off, chased a school of gizzards and then gave up and hung out here. They could be there. That could be the deal. So
And we saw that a lot. Exactly what you're talking about. I saw firsthand a lot in that open, covering the guys that caught them on day one, went to the same areas that caught them on day two, even guys that weren't dealing with other angler pressure, as far as other boats being on their stuff, and still didn't catch them. And it was the exact same scenario that you mentioned. So that's certainly going to be a factor. And again, you roll all those things into the fact that there's going to be at least a shallow bite. How consistent, how good, how big the quality is up there, you don't really know. But, in a way, with all these, factors at play fishing offshore, like, I'm going to guarantee you there's going to be some guys that just stick shallow and stick to their guns and do it to avoid that altogether.
Oh, for sure. And when you think about Wheeler, the Tennessee River, you've also got the Elk River that's at the west side of, the west portion of Wheeler. And if you could do something in there, those are, in my opinion, uh, a lot more residential fish. Those fish probably hang in the elk and do their deal and live. That is their ecosystem. They don't have to go swim all the way up the river from the Tennessee River to make their livelihood. And so, what you could also find, instead of fish being dialed in on gizzard shad or something, those fish could be brim eaters. Those fish could be, they've
Sure.
never, there's fish that are probably 5 pounds that have never eaten a gizzard shad unless it's wandered up the river. But so different strategies could come into play. I could see a frog playing. We could see a bladed jig playing. Maybe some old school Tennessee River ledge fishing baits playing, and then just some shallow junk fishing, swim jigging, definitely some kind of maybe buzz bait in the morning or something, and then the flipping the heaviest and thick cover you can find if it does lend itself to being present. I know of some places I think as well to the west portion of the lake, some pockets and some creeks and some things that you can get in, and like Bowman said to you on the phone call, that it looks like Dardanelle. It does. The more east you go from, looking at the map, the more east you go, you'll see obviously the industrial portion of it, the islands portion of it, a lot of back cuts and back channels and things like that. And so we'll see who makes the run which way or another and how the map lays out. I look forward to looking at the private map and seeing the how they're dispersed throughout the playing field. But um we've been there a couple times, like we talked about. We'd expect probably, and I asked him, I said that weight deal. My weight prediction was around 81, 20 pounds a day. I'd expect a 24, 25 pound bag to maybe be leading it. Can they back it up with 16? Do they back it up with 20? What do they do? And so I'd expect somewhere around 80 for sure. And he said, I think that's a solid number, maybe 77 to 78. So we're within a pound per day on average from each other in the guesstimations. And his would be more clued in than mine. But I just also add in 4 or 5 pounds because they're the Elite Series and expect them to do better than we think, especially nowadays. But before we transition, I wanted to say congratulations to the Arkansas Razorbacks, man. College national champions, baby. It's just in track and field and not in
Right.
baseball. Everybody thought they'd be saying that this year, maybe, in baseball, but it's in track and field. So,
For
uh,
like the 51st time, I think.
exactly. I
I'm
think it
not,
was
I don't even know why. I don't even know why they still do the national championship. I think Arkansas wins it every single year.
I think
Uh,
they had the fifth fastest time in the women's 4x400 relay or something. Like it was like point 0.4 or point 0.8 off of the USA time, Team USA. So I'm like, why even do auditions? Just put their team at
yeah, just take their
Team
team.
Arkansas. Um, can we sign up to be our own country? We can compete against the United States. Uh,
Right.
but anyways, so let's transition to what we're gonna do and what we're gonna call as the B&W Trailer Hitches question of the day. Kyle, all right, you ready for this? Ponder on this, and then I'll get your take on it first offhand. How far is too far to come back and make the Classic at this point in the season? 5 events in the books, 4 events to go. You got 100 angler field. How far down the Angler of the Year standings can someone be and still make the Bassmaster Classic? While you ponder over that, I'll give some other factors as well in just a moment. But we appreciate B&W Trailer Hitches being a part of the Inside Bassmaster podcast. They are the stow and go trailer hitch that you want if you're an outdoorsman, whether you're doing yard work with a trailer or you're hooking up to your boat to go to the lake. Maybe you're hooking up and going jet skiing, pontooning, whatever you're doing. They have a trailer hitch for you. The stow and go method's great. Also on our shins in the parking lot. I think our boy Fat Cat Newton hit his shin on a trailer hitch the other day. If it was stowed away like the B&W, you wouldn't have those problems. So they definitely have the options for you. Check them out, B&W Trailer Hitches. Appreciate them doing our question of the day. So I'll rephrase it. How far is too far to come back and make the Bassmaster Classic with the way the AOY race is shaping up right now? 5 events in the books, 4 to go. 40th place, roughly, is the strategic, Bassmaster Classic cut line, and that is held by Jason Christie at 276. That's how many points. I think I did the math around 495 to 505, somewhere in there is normally the classic cut line, and that's still what the projected one is this year. So Jason Christie, 276, holding down the last spot. You've got the likes of Brandon Polinick, Greg Hackney, Taku Ito, Luke Palmer, Alex Redwine, Drew Cook, all right behind him. 6 anglers right there fighting for the classic. When you go down, Kenta Kamira in 70th place, 30 spots out of the classic cut, and it's only 50 points. 30 spots, 50 points. When you get all the way down to 90th, Seth Fighter, that's 101 points for 50 anglers. So is that too far? What's too far to come back?
What is too far to come back? 100th is too far to come back. I think that's going to be a hard mountain to climb. To answer your question, you and I talked about this the other day, so I don't remember exactly what my answer was, which I wish I did. But
No one else will know.
I'm gonna say I was somewhere in the mid 70s is what I said. And I think if I was gonna, maybe even go a little bit lower than that, I would say between 80 and 82nd. That's all being within, over 200 points. I'm gonna say that it's certainly possible. If you string together some really, really good events, obviously somewhere in the low to mid 80s you could, but if I was guessing what number could come back, like, or will, if you wanted to play that game, I'm gonna say that. Let's see. I'm pretty certain when we talked about the other day, I said mid 70s, but we'll go down to 82nd.
Yeah, and it's not even just the points of how far is feasible to come back. It's got to be the right guy with the right schedule set up. Can a guy like you said, 200 points, Keith Combs, Caleb Kufall. You got Keith Combs going to the Tennessee River and going up north, 2 places that he's done really well at. You've got Caleb Kufall. He could fish shallow in this next one. He's won at Smith by, granted it was in April. So it's one of those things of like those 2 guys have good track records on at least half the fisheries that we have coming up. But yeah, it's one of those deals where right now Joey Cifuentes is 102nd and he has 78 points. He would need to win out to make the Bassmaster Classic, and he would still fall short of the approximate points, but obviously winning the final event at the St. Lawrence gets you in the Classic, so he would be in by the win, but he would still be below the projected points. So then you got to think, okay, if he needs 4 wins to do that, and he's at 78 points, let's go to a guy that's, let's just say, 138, somebody who's 60 points higher. That's Frank Talley, Gerald Swindle, somewhere in the middle there. There's about a 24-point swing between those two. So you think low 90s, you're going to need to have 4 top 15s. No question. Got to have 4 top 15s. And then you go another 60 points up from 170, or what is it, from 150 to about 210. You're going to need some top 25s. Maybe if you get a top 15, you're allowed to miss a cut and be below 50th, but you're going to start to, you can't, we're going to have a lot more people eliminating themselves points wise. They can still win it in at the end, but eliminating themselves points wise with if you miss a cut at Wheeler, we're going to shave 10 or 12 more people off that list on what's feasible. Brandon Cobb at 223, being about 53 points behind, still very doable. I think who did I say? 200 points maybe. You said they're about
Football.
75, yeah, 75 points behind, 76 points behind for Combs and Kufal. Very doable. Um, I think even Seth Fighter down in 90th. We were talking about this off camera as well. Buddy Gross, Seth Fighter, Scott Martin. Scott's already in the classic, obviously. Carl Jocumsen, all those guys right there. They're 100 points off the pace right now, but four top 25s and let it play out. We'll see what it goes. But I think that you still probably need you're gonna have to get a couple top tens if you're in that realm. But I really want to highlight somebody as well. We were amazed that he was this high. I was looking lower to try to find him, but Bob Downey. Bob Downey is 76th. So two-prong question. We did the how far is too far to come back. We've kind of narrowed that down in another way by saying who we think could come back at most. So below that would be too far to come back. But Bob Downey 76th in points, and he's only fished 4 Elite Series events. He missed the Harris Chain and got dead last because the birth of his baby boy Jet. So 4 events, and he's in 76th, and he is roughly 65 points behind. So 65 points back with 4 events to go. I think Bob Downey can make the classic with 8 out of 9 tournaments fished. And that's not even having like a phenomenal year because we know what Bob Downey's capable of. But let me just read off his 4 event finishes right now. He started the year out poor overall. He had a 68th, so he made a small check but missed the cut. Had an 88th at Fork, which was put him down in there even farther, probably somewhere in the 80th or the 75th, 80th place rank in points. Then he goes and has to leave the classic early, not a points event, but still just in the whole realm of he had 2 poor events, finished last in the classic because he had to leave after day 1. He does not go to the Harris Chain, gets last there, has the birth of his child, and then basically has turned his season around with a 15th at the St. John's and a 34th at Murray. So one above average finish and one above the classic cut line finish. And he's boom, like 60 points from being able to make the classic. I think that's doable. 8 out of 9 events. That would be something.
Yeah, and that's the thing when you look at the standings and I say 80th place and then you see Bob Downey in 76th and you're like, "Can you really make the classic missing an entire event?" But he's like you said, certainly in a position to do so, with a strong finish to the season and what a story that will be if he can come back all the way because, when as an angler, at least in that moment when you have to missed that tournament. Obviously, you're bummed. That's, happy for him in the sense that he was getting to watch the birth of his child, but also bummed that you're like, man, like that's probably going to mess up my season pretty bad, but you can live past it given that, there's so many positives come
Yeah.
with it. And then here he is sitting there in a position where he can still possibly do it with some good events. And you're like, man, like that's really, really impressive. So, speaks volumes to Bob Downey and it'll be interesting to see the next 2 events if he can stay on that right trajectory and then give himself a real shot with the northern swing, and that'll be a whole separate story we're gonna have to keep an eye on.
What's crazy is I was just curious on Brandon Cobb, second in points last year, 71st right now. He's 5 places ahead of Bob Downey, but he's 12 points. Let me read off Brandon Cobb's finishes and how he's 12 points ahead of Bob Downey, who has a dead last 0-point event. Um, Cobb has a 87th, a 47th, 66th, 59th, and 38th. Like 3 of those aren't bad. 47, 38, 59, not bad. 66, that's even close enough to not being not bad. And he's got an 87th. He has a finish. What did I say? Um I think Bob Downey has 2 worse finishes than that. But I guess he would have 2 higher finishes than Cobb this year as well. But yeah,
Sure.
Bob has an 88th and a 103rd, 2 finishes worse than Cobb's lowest finish. But Bob has 2 upper echelon finishes because it's a whole lot easier, Kyle. We know it to get 40th to 60th than it is to get 15th. The difference in 15th and 40th points wise, it's 25. But what you got to do and what that means for you, a 15th means a whole lot more than stacking some 40ths. You need that consistency, but boy, if you can get in the top 10 or close to a top 10, that leaps you ahead of so many people in the points. So we'll see about that. Some big time notables on the outside looking in at this point in the season. Obviously, with double qualifications, Hamner's in the Classic right now, points wise and from the defending champ aspect. So the line will go down. But just saying, if Hamner has a terrible Final Four events and doesn't make the Classic points wise, then I don't want to have to walk this back. So as it currently states, the first couple people out we mentioned were Polinick, Hackney, Taku, Palmer, Alex Redwine, Drew Cook. Then you've got the likes of Jeff Gustafson in 50th. And these are just some notable names, champions or other things in the past. Jeff Gustafson in 50th, about 16 points off the pace. You've got Kiyoya Fujita, 56th, about 24 points off the pace. You'd expect him to make those up. Kyle Welcher, our defending points champ, 57th, about 6 points behind Fujita. So he's another, what is that? He's 46 to 76. He's 30 points back. You've got Steve Kennedy, who I expect to do well in these next two events, and maybe the St. Lawrence River based on where we're launching from to be able to come back. Mike Iaconelli, 64th. You've got Kenta Kimura, who's done well lately, and Paul Mueller, two guys who should do well in the smallmouth swing, 68th and 70th, respectively. We talked about Cobb in 71st, Clark Winlet, 75th, Bill Lowe in 78th. Then you go down, we mentioned Combs in 80th, Rick Cluns in 86th, Scott Canterbury, 87th. This whole stretch right now, 87 through 90, 87 through 97. We'll just say those 10 spots. People you expect to be in the Classic: Scott Canterbury, Carl Jacobson, Scott Martin, who will be in the Classic via his Opens win, Seth Feider, Buddy Gross, Cliff Perch, Greg DePalma, John Cruz, Cole Sands, Frank Talley, and Gerald Swindle. You want to talk about, you could take that 10 and put them 15th to 25th in points, wouldn't be shocked. Have them like,
Nobody would be surprised. Yeah.
holy cow. And that's even with, some mistakes on Cole Sands' part, fishing without a fishing license for one day, losing his weight at Murray. That would have been a big made cut, but instead it's a missed cut for him. You've got Cruz, who had two Florida events where he's had success and just didn't do phenomenally well at all. Swindle's been off his game this year, it seems. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. And then you go down a little bit farther. Matt Robertson and Joey Cifuentes, 101st and 102nd. Unexplainable there. It seems like Matt Robertson's fishing very well in every tournament he fishes that's not on the Elite Series. Like, he's winning trophies, doing things outside of the Elites, but every time he launches for the Elites, it doesn't work well. Joey, same thing. Joey wins 2 last year, gets 5th in points, wins Rookie of the Year, and he is the last registered point person because Clint Davis is the only one below him who pulled out and left the Elite Series before the last event. So odd group of guys below that. And not for any rhyme or reason. It's not like, oh, none of these guys know how to scope. None of these guys know the electronics. Like, there's a mixture of guys. Kiyoya Fujita, 56th place. He was tied for first in points like 3 events ago. So it just shows you how quick. It reminds me of Greg Hackney's 2018 when he was 9th in points after his Sabine River win. We had 4 events left, and he finishes 43rd and misses the Classic. And that's less dramatic of a drop than we're seeing some of these guys experience.
Yeah, no, that's a good example. As soon as you said Greg Hackney, that's the exact season I thought of because he had that win on the Sabine River in fairly dominating fashion. You're like, man, he's going to make a run at AOY. And then it turned out to be the exact opposite. And you're like, what happened?
Iaconelli last year, top 10. We're
Yeah.
like, he's the only guy in the top 10 with Northern success and history. Uh-oh. And then he misses the Classic up north. Crazy.
Yeah, it can certainly change fast. And that's why, every single day on the Elite Series, as an angler is so crucial. I mean, every hour, every bite, everything is so crucial that when you look at it from that perspective, it's like it amplifies it big time. And That's why, again, like I said, every day counts. Like you got to better what you did the day before. Like you just got to keep going, keep going, keep going, and that's way easier said than done. If everybody could just do it, they would. But it is such a difficult sport to be consistent at.
What's crazy is I was just about to follow up, and you had mentioned around, Combs and Kufal. Now, I'll let you before we move on. Are those the guys you're locking in? Like if you had to, I think that range is totally fine, but who is someone when you look down that list at the end of the St. Lawrence, you're like, I expect them to be in the cut. That specific person
From what number down?
from just that's just I don't know. Let's just go 65th and lower.
Kenta Kamura
Yep.
in
Okay.
70th. I think that's the guy that I would certainly expect. Two smallmouth events to end the year. I see him doing really well at Wheeler. I think he's going to have a really good one there. Um,
He's on my fantasy team.
he's on mine as well.
A little
Uh,
preview.
yeah, same here. I certainly and you could justify 65th down. I mean, like we said earlier, you could justify about almost every single one of them, honestly, because they're all names that you would expect to see in the classic cut as it is. But if I had to pick somebody 75th or 65th or down, I would say Kenta Kamura is gonna string together four good ones, and it's just hard to imagine he's gonna have four tournaments in a row, to tack on to a already uncharacteristically poor season. So I'm gonna say Kenta is gonna be the guy that ends up making the classic.
I like it. I like it. I would agree, and I'll just to say someone different. I think that Bob Downey will get in the classic. I think he's going to do it with 8 events, and it's going to be awesome. But to be since we've already talked about him, to throw someone else different in there, I think KJ Queen. I think Wheeler and Smith are going to be a-okay for him. I think it's going to come down to Champlain and the St. Lawrence, just like it did for his Rookie of the Year season when him and Brian New were leading Rookie of the Year and we're right there. And then all of a sudden, him, I think it was,
Straightener.
I think it was Hamner, Queen, New, and Robertson all floundered, and Stracener wins Rookie of the
Yeah,
Year.
yeah.
And those were the four that did that. And so I expect Queen to have been better than what he was there. Brian New's right behind him in points, 77th. Um, but KJ's 74th. We were talking about those crazy finishes and how Cobb's finishes weren't that much different than Bob's finishes. KJ has a third place finish, but he has a 92nd and a 102nd. You just can't have those. And so maybe KJ comes back. Awesome. Well, let's transition to our fantasy picks. Why don't you? Let me pull up my team. We already gave you a little preview of who we were picking. But let me pull up my team, and Kyle, you pull up yours. Go ahead and let's go into Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, and you tell me who you got, and then we'll dig into why afterwards. Just list them off A through E.
Bucket A. I've got the young man that is on fire right now and not the one at the top of the leaderboard, one that maybe you wouldn't expect. I got Jacob Fouts and Bucket A. Bucket B, I have Brandon Palnick. Bucket C, Greg Hackney. Bucket D, Kenta Kamura, as we mentioned earlier. And Bucket E, which is a tough one in a lot of ways, but I got David Mullins in Bucket E. So Jacob Fouts, Brandon Palnick, Greg Hackney, Kenta Kamura, and David Mullins are going to be my A through E buckets.
I've got me some Brandon Lester, Robert G, Taku Ito, Kenta Kamura, and Matt Robertson. Those are my A through E. So Lester, G, Ito, Kimura, and Robertson. So Fouts, Tennessee River. I see it. I feel it. I know it. Any other reason?
He's just fishing so well this year. I mean, Such wrote a Daily Limit story about Jacob Fouts and all that. He's been through and done the last year or two. Is fishing extremely extremely well, and then you put him in a place that's his comfort zone. It might not be a lake that he's fished a ton, but Tennessee River obviously is incredibly good in those fisheries. We saw it a couple of years ago at Pickwick, finishing fourth there, I believe. I'm just gonna take the momentum, and I took that as an opportunity. When you look at Bucket A, obviously a lot of the story has been with Jordan Lee and Trey McKinney, and rightfully so. They deserve a ton of credit because they both got off to incredibly good starts this season. But Jacob Fouts going from a guy, just a couple of years ago or even a year ago, maybe not even requalifying if it
6
wasn't
events
for
ago. Yeah.
yeah, if it wasn't for, a tremendous stretch towards the tail end of the season to a guy that you're talking about inside the top 10 in progressive Bassmaster Angler of the Year points. I mean, it is quite the turnaround. And then, like I said, you put him on a body of water where a lot of his comfort zones will be met with Tennessee River, offshore fishing, cranking, whatever it may be. Jacob Fouts in bucket A at only 2.9%. That's hard for me to beat. And then, you go down, Brandon Polnick, you could pick him pretty much any tournament of the
Whoa,
year,
whoa,
and you
whoa,
could
whoa, 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 whoa. I got to give my Brandon Lester before we move on. I got to give, oh, yeah,
all
yeah.
right,
See.
relax, relax, relax.
Look at him in bucket A, going from being never, hadn't missed a cut and gets second in points in 2022 to missing cuts and missing the classic last year. I had a conversation with him in in Tulsa in the expo, interviewing him in the Toyota booth, and said, "Buddy, I don't want to be talking to you one bit next year. I want you to be fishing this, get it together." And he said, "We're going to do our best." And now all of a sudden, through 5 events, he's in the top 20 in points, 19th right now, 2%. And what I love about Lester, I try to pick guys that are versatile, but I am not afraid if this turns into a shallow derby or if this is a offshore ledge derby. Or shallow bar. Like he won Pickwick shallow bars, little turns offshore, like a shallow ledge. If he went up shallow and caught him on the bank day one or day two, not going to be shocked either. And so I think I really like Lester there, and 2% as well. The big ask in this bucket is the Alabama guys. 14 Elite Series pros from Alabama. Justin Hamner, not his home lake, not near his home. 15% pick rate. Jordan Lee, closer to his home, still wouldn't be one of his 2 or 3 or 4 home lakes. 36%. Do you like what the fans are doing there with those two picks, Kyle, or do you think a little bit too Alabama for your liking in that?
On Jordan Lee and Justin Hamner.
Yeah, the being the
Yeah,
percentages they are. I can see
I
why
would say
Trey is
so.
19%. Trey, it's basically one of those like I'm gonna pick him until he proves me wrong because he's so
100%.
good. So I don't
100%.
blame them, but those other two, they're having great years, but it's like, did Jordan was it 36 because he's Alabama or because he's second in points, or Hamner because he's sixth in points and he's Alabama? Like,
Yeah,
what
I,
is that?
I don't know. That's a great question. And when you look at it, I see it from two different standpoints. It's like you could justify picking those guys just about anywhere based on their momentum, what they've done this year, and the fact that they're well-versed anglers. But this tournament specifically, I did notice that Wheeler, maybe being that there's a little, there's definitely some question marks. A lot of the guys that didn't fish the Open last year and haven't been fishing the Elite Series since 2016 or even before then, don't have a ton of experience here. So it did seem like when you're going through the buckets, guys that were from Alabama were selected pretty heavily in almost every bucket. And that's not a bad strategy. I'm not saying that in a negative manner. Naturally, um, guys that are from Alabama naturally have probably fished Wheeler more than a lot of the field. In some cases, some of the guys have fished every event since, the first Elite Series tournament. So I'm gonna say maybe a little bit over the top as far as picking Alabama guys. When you mention it with Lester being in bucket A, a guy
He's
that
one of the
is
closest guys, probably.
yeah, has won on the Tennessee River ledge fishing, is as consistent as they come, and has just been a force for fishing offshore in the summertime or in the post spawn. To only be at 2.6% is just kind of crazy. So to answer your question, I'd say it's a little over the top, but I mean at the same point, when you look at those two picks, it's hard to say that you shouldn't justify picking those two either. So I can see it from both ways.
Yeah, I was contemplating lying on the podcast and saying I was picking someone else so that no one could hear me whisper, pick Brandon Lester.
Yeah,
And so,
less than
but
3%.
I'm also at 70% this year, so I don't know if you want to listen to me necessarily. I had a bad Lake Murray because I'm a stupid boy. Okay, bucket B, Brandon Polinick for you. Go.
Yeah, to me that's a pretty simple one. I got the chance to cover him on the water last year, where he finished second at Wheeler, in the open. And I just think anytime you're talking about post spawn offshore structure fishing, Brandon Palaniuk with his 360 with his electronics is so dialed in on offshore structure that it's hard to justify not picking Brandon Palaniuk in the bucket. Obviously, at 14.9% player percentage, one of the highest in the bucket. As I'm looking, I think he's the second highest. But obviously, we've got another case of exactly what you're talking about with Will Davis Jr. leading the way in bucket B, and Will Davis might very well win the tournament, but we also don't know for a fact if Will Davis has spent more than 6 days fishing on Wheeler Lake. I think it's one of those deals where, um, it's a combination of Will Davis Jr. being a fantastic angler and then also being from Alabama. Maybe that his player percentage is so high. But for me, Brandon Palaniuk, when I think of offshore structure fishing, post spawn, Brandon Palaniuk is so dialed in with that. It's an easy pick for me in bucket B.
Yeah, I saw that, and this just feels like you don't have to be exclusively out. You don't have to be exclusively in. You can just toe that line, and Brandon's going to be one of those guys that could just catch one. He could catch one on a glide bait on a big barge tie up and go swim jig in the morning, find some random shad spawn bite that's somehow still going on, and then drop shot when the current's not flowing and catch some schools of fish too. Um, so I like it. I think Robert G didn't have a bad showing here last year in the Open. Um, he's a Tennessee River kid, whether it's over in Knoxville region. I think that he's fishing a little bit better. Toledo was let me look at his finishes right now, but Toledo was a great one to start the year. Then he had a terrible one at Fork where he was like dead last, but then was able to jump up and get 15 points out of it. And then he stabilized with a 40th, and then he got a 30th, and then he got a 33rd. And so I'm like, okay, maybe Robert G just won't be my guy who bombs. He won't be my guy who does that. And so bucket B, about the only thing I like about the University of Tennessee is Robert G at this point.
Solid pick. Solid pick. Moving on to bucket C, I've got Greg Hackney. And for the same reason that you mentioned, guys that you could easily see doing a little bit of both. Obviously, over the course of Greg Hackney's career, he's had success doing everything at this point. But shallow offshore fish, I feel like is something that Greg Hackney has had success in. Um, you know, not that long ago. And then you factor in a guy that could literally go to the bank, throw a frog, swim a jig, do whatever, dob a cricket around, whatever it might be. Greg Hackney, and also Greg Hackney's history at Wheeler has been phenomenal. In 4 Elite Series events, Hackney has two sixth place finishes and a 13 or 34th. So I mean, it's a
What's the
place
other
that
one?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but it was outside of the cut, or I would
Okay,
have
okay.
it for
I
sure.
was about to say, and a
But I
dead
mean,
last. No.
three out of four, and as far as
Yeah, good finishes.
yeah, two sixth place finishes and a 34th. Obviously, it's a place that he must not hate too bad. So, um, and
And
another
is
thing, Greg
that's in the
Hackney,
elites you said, right? That's the elites.
yes,
I
yes,
think he fished. Did he fish here in the Open last year after Lay? Yeah, he did. He got 25th there, so there's another good finish.
yeah. I mean, clearly a place that Greg Hackney vibes with. 9.5%, not too over the top. I felt like, considering there were some in the bucket that were significantly higher than that. But Greg Hackney, I mean, is a guy also, I've had conversations with him before about how he wishes, consistently there's more summertime grinders type tournaments, whether it be fishing shallow, like river type systems or whatever it may be. Like he is all in favor of that style of tournament. I could easily see him turning, Wheeler as long as it's not a massive slugfest into a tournament that fits right up his alley.
I like it, and I thought a little different, because you kind of don't expect this guy to do well, even though 16% picked him for some reason. I just feel like Taku Ito is gonna like bust a bag, like somewhere doing something. Um, I also feel like if he gets on the Decatur Flats and it's pressured and those fish are tougher to bite, he will find a way. Like he will put his dust, his powder, whatever it is, And he like I don't know. I just have a feeling that it's not a full-fledged deep water electronics deal. Um, but he caught them really shallow, even though they were on those electronics at fork. Like he busted almost 40 pounds day one
Sure.
and was able to like have a decent finish out of it. Um, I feel like he's gonna do well here this week. Um, and it's also I really didn't have anybody else in the bucket that I really wanted to pick. Hackney's always a good pick, and then Fujita's about the same pick rate as Taku is, about 14 to 16%. And then you go down, Kyle Welcher picked highly. I like it for his style of fishing. Um, but I don't know. I didn't want to pick 30% on a guy that I know it's not his home lake and he probably hadn't fished it a ton. Like you were saying, there's probably a lot of Alabama anglers that have driven through Decatur, Alabama plenty of times, but it's always on the way to a tournament somewhere else, probably. But now
Sure.
we've had an Elite Series event in this era. I want to go back and see how many guys were on the Elite Series in 2016 that fished this Wheeler event. It might only be like 15 guys. So we'll keep an eye on that as well, because it's really their first tangible experience other than the Open last year if they fished it. So, Taku, I just have a feeling, and same thing about Kenta. Kenta's not the finesse Japanese angler that we would all expect him to be. Yes, he's very good with a spinning rod. Yes, he is good with finesse tactics, but he is a big spoon, big plug, big swim bait type of guy. And I love that crash collision with um, Wheeler Lake this weekend at 9.5%. He's lower than Cobb at 30, lower than David Gaston at 18%. I don't even know if David Gaston's fishing this week because why would you when you're catching 800-pound tuna offshore? Like, why don't you just stay offshore? Those fish pay a whole lot more than bass do at times. So why don't you just go do that? It does take a lot more to fill up those boats, though. I mean, when they put in 500 gallons and then they got a big gas bladder of 500 or 250 gallons. That's not cheap. So you better catch the winning fish there. But yeah, with the likes of those guys being the highest percentage guys, you got Joseph Webster. I think Joseph Webster should be favorited more next event in Alabama than this one, being Smith Lake closer to his home. So I like Kenta in this bucket as well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. You said everything that I would say about Kento with his power fishing style, despite, a lot of the other Japanese anglers are so focused on finesse tactics. Kenta is very good at that as well. But like you said, with a big swim bait, speed cranking, like the things that he does are very unique. And it goes back to what you said earlier about Taku Itu in bucket C is, fishing for pressured fish, like you have to do some different stuff a lot of times to trigger those fish to bite. And it seems like a tournament where Kenta can do that to a T. And to your credit, it's like it goes back to what we talked about, like just picking guys because Alabama's in their name. Like you said, I don't know if David Gaston's ever even fished Wheeler Lake.
Why
Like
would you
I'm
leave
not,
the Coosa when you're
and
just Coosa guy? It's like in Arkansas. You've got the Arkansas River guys and you've got the Hot Springs guys. You got the guys that do not go to Dardanelle and Little Rock Pool, and those guys don't go to Washita and Hamilton. They stay the Coosa River and the Tennessee River. They might have that same type of thing.
And with that being said, I mean, it's possible that there's something I overlooked or didn't do my research, strong enough to where like maybe there's some substantial evidence to pick David Gaston. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, like he's not going to catch him. I could easily see him catching him when you think about his, power fishing and shallow water prowess. I mean, he could be a great pick, but like to be almost 20%, and like I said, at least like in big
Yeah,
tournaments that I'm
show me
aware of.
something. Yeah, show me
Yeah, like
something. Yeah.
I just don't even know if there's like evidence in the past to suggest that pick, but it is a little bit of a head scratcher, but who knows. If I had to guess, I'm saying all this now and he's probably going to win the tournament just
Oh,
because questioned 18%.
I don't expect him to bomb. I expect him to punch him in the mouth. But
Same.
um, I also, you can still be like sure that they have the skill, but confused on does everybody else know something we don't know?
That's what I'm wondering. That's exactly what I'm wondering on that.
um, well, let's go to bucket E. It looks like we both picked two Tennessee River guys that are on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to the Tennessee River. Like one's at the tailwaters, one's at the headwaters of the Tennessee River, but both are very good, especially when you think about summertime ledge fishing.
Yeah, and Bucket E is tough because there's literally 4 or 5 guys, no, more than that even really, that have historically done really well Tennessee River, ledge fishing or just Tennessee River fishing in general. I mean, you look at Scott Canterbury, Seth Fider, Buddy Gross, David Mullins, and I'm probably gonna leave some out, Matthew or Matt Robertson, Gerald Swindle,
Cole
Cole
Sands,
Sands. Yeah, I mean, literally, there are guys that, in any other bucket you would consider, but they're
Mike
all
Huff.
stacked in bucket E. Yeah, Mike Huff, absolutely. Um, they're all stuffed in bucket E, and you're just not used to seeing most any of these guys in bucket E. And then, in a tournament where it fits almost all their styles, it makes it very, very difficult. And the percentages were kind of all over the place. I mean, you think at um, David Mullins at 2.1%. I'm just kind of playing the percentages here. I think that you could justify picking any one of those guys that we just listed off there being, Tennessee River Hammers, but 2.1%, I'm just going to try to play under the player percentage here and score one up. And it might not work out. We'll see.
Like Gerald Swindle, other than having an event at Gunnersville, isn't going to have one closer to his home than Wheeler. And he's at a lower percentage than a guy who's probably farther than
Crazy.
Wheeler at Scott Canterbury and David Gaston. And you're like, is it because they just have the fans given up on Swindle this year and don't think that he's going to come back, or from his tough start to the year, and he thinks Canterbury's closer to making that classic, so he's going to show up? Like, I don't know. I don't think that anybody's going to lay over and quit. So yeah, it's just weird. But yeah, Matt Robertson, same
Yeah.
thing.
It,
At some point, he's gonna kick the bucket. And I don't mean die. I mean like kick the bucket of the suck bucket that he's just been hot tubbing in. I'd expect him to kick that suck bucket soon enough, and I expect it to be at Wheeler this week. Um, if he doesn't kick the suck bucket this week, somebody's getting kicked, and it might not be somebody who, he might be one of those backstage things that we're talking about. I don't know.
yeah, we're gonna get some good footage on the Moultrie cams this week.
Yeah,
First week
exactly.
of that.
Exclusive. Check it out on YouTube.
But
Um,
to your credit, I will add that that was one of the most shocking things to me is like Gerald Swindle not being the highest picked angler in the bucket.
yeah,
Not only just for his popularity, but like you said, fishing as close to his home, obviously not being his home lake, but fits in his style perfectly. I mean, he's a great ledge fisherman, is incredibly good Tennessee River fisherman, and to
shallow
not even be
swim
the
jiggers.
highest.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean all the things, and for him not to be the highest angler in the bucket is still just crazy. But for same for him, I could easily see him turning it around this week and getting on a good stretch of tournaments here. So something to watch out for as well in bucket either.
We're gonna go rapid fire through our that was our Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. We're gonna go rapid fire through our Falcon rods, drain the lake. But first, there's a couple people not on the rosters that we need to make note of for the fans. So we're not going to be at the 103 that we started the season with. We obviously had lost Clint Davis before the Lake Murray event. He had shoulder surgery, but he's not returning to the Elite Series either way on medical hardship. He's just stepping away from the Elite Series. And so since our last podcast, we've also had, I believe, two other people. So now we're going to be at 100. Tell us about those two.
Yeah, Derek Hudnall just chose to step away from the Elite Series, just retiring. If you want more information on that, he put out a YouTube video on that. We released a story on Bassmaster.com, just a decision on his end, just to step away and nothing, no hard feelings on either end by any means. That's an obvious thing. Derek Hudnall's is as good as they come as a human being. So just decided to step away. That the time was now for him to you know I guess just retire and call it good on the Elite Series.
It's
Talked about it being a giant dream of his. Go ahead.
it's tough financially. And
Sure.
so people may see 55th in AOY and think, well, this is a systematic problem if somebody in 55th can't survive. You could be 55th and have a bunch of $2,500 checks this year, or make one $10,000 check and not have any bombs, but you're just not getting enough of the right finishes. And so that's what Derek kind of said in that video to sum it up. He said he had been too mediocre, riding that line of good and bad, but just right in the middle there. A couple more lows in his career than highs. And if those flip and a mediocre turns into a high, he's still here this week. And so great head on his shoulders, one of my favorite people. Got to go to a Cardinals versus Saints football game in the Dome in New Orleans with him and his family. So he's always treated me well. I remember covering him at the Atchafalaya when he first qualified for the Elite Series, when I was covering the Opens on the water. Great dude, great representative, going to be good for the sport and industry wherever he decides to plug in. But a father's got to do what a father's got to do. A husband's got to do what a husband's got to do. You got to get it done. You got to do. And so sometimes the dream has to be put on hold or step back from it to survive and play another day. And so we love Derek, but yes, that was one that was announced last week publicly by him as well.
Yeah, and then the second one that you mentioned was Jamie Hartman. Jamie's going through some back issues. He's going to get a medical hardship for this season and should be back for the 2025 season. So
Same thing
we'll
he
have
dealt with, I think in 2020, I think it was 2019 or 2021, something like that, where
yeah.
he couldn't get out of his boat to or couldn't get out of his bed to go fish the Mississippi River event. Ended up doing a medical hardship that season. I'm trying to think of when that was. It was after his two wins in 2019, but we didn't go to the Mississippi River in 2020. It had to be 2021. Had to be that year.
2022 was the last time we went to.
Yeah, that was the most recent, but did we go? Um,
I've
Either
only been
way.
I've only been there once, and I think that was the only time. Yeah, I don't know. Either way, yeah, same general issues. Got to get that fixed and get better before making a comeback to the Elite Series. So best of wishes, obviously, to Jamie on a quick
Oh,
recovery.
it was before his back injury. He won the Rookie of the Year in 2017, and then he ruptured a disc in his back and had that sciatic nerve deal at Lacrosse in 2018.
Ah,
Missed the rest of that season, came back in 19 and won two events. Yeah, yeah. Um, cool. Falcon Rods drained the lake. Who did you save for this event? Any duplicates and crossovers? Kyle, Jessie, go.
yeah, I do believe I have some duplicates. Jacob Fouts being one of them, and then a couple guys we talked about: Gerald Swindle, Carl Jochimson, and Scott Canterbury. So going Tennessee River heavy / Alabama heavy in the first four of my roster.
I have one duplicate, and that would be Matt Robertson. And remember, I set mine before the season starts, so who knows? Luckily, none of the people who've dropped out are on the team for me to have to replace. But Matt Robertson, John Garrett, Seth Feider, Steve Kennedy. I didn't imagine Seth Feider would be 90th in points coming into this event when I had picked him in the beginning of the season. I still am confident that this is a bounce back event for him, maybe his best of the season. And I definitely didn't expect Steve Kennedy to be coming off a 90th from Murray into this event. But then, yeah, Matt Robertson, John Garrett, two Tennessee River guys, Kentucky Lake, Seth Feider, Steve Kennedy. Those are my first four.
To finish out my roster, I also had John Garrett, Buddy Gross, Cole Sands, and I got a name that might surprise you because a lot of people will save him, but I'm going Brandon Polnick. I am that confident that he's going to catch him at Wheeler that I think this might be his best finish, might even win it.
So you had another duplicate there. There we go.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I kind of forgot about that. They weren't in order as far
Yes,
as the first four when I'm
exactly.
looking at my roster, so I didn't consider it as a duplicate. But and I don't know, maybe it's just like last year being gun shy of having him at the St. Lawrence River and saving him, and then having by far his worst finish at the St. Lawrence River. I'm just so confident in him as a post spawn southern largemouth fisherman, which for the longest time you wouldn't think that. You would think save him again, like I said, for the smallmouth swing, but like I just think this fits his style so well, and then him doing so well here last year, fishing offshore, doing things that on paper should still work again, in June. In some ways, might even work better in some areas. Um, I'm just super confident that he's going to catch him. So I want to use him now, and I might regret it, very well might, but I'm going Brandon Polnick duplicate as well.
I used Polinick at the St. John's and he got 16th. So I'm pleased with getting a 16th out
Solid.
of him. But when you pick
Solid.
Brandon in fantasy, especially when it comes to Drain the Lake, you need a win. Like he
Right.
wins enough that you're like, you got, it's like
Yes.
Walters. I picked him and
Yes.
he got second at Toledo and I was very pleased. And he goes and freaking wins Murray. And I'm like, dang it. The most obvious one there. And I was sneaky and it was paid off. But boy, I took that one to the nuts. Sorry. Last four for me. Logan Parks, Elite Series rookie. Caleb Kufal, Wes Logan, and Keith Combs. And you can see in those four picks, they got two guys who would probably be classified as offshore anglers in Logan Parks and Keith Combs. And I got two guys who can catch them up on the bank very well, Caleb Kufal and Wes Logan. And so I tried to keep my team a little bit more balanced for this one, knowing that there was going to be probably a two-pronged approach there for Wheeler. So awesome. What was your winning weight? Did you make one? I said
Yeah,
80, I said
it was a little
81-14.
it was a little lower than you. I had 76-10.
Okay, good. I like that. We're not, if we're within basically 1 pound average per day, like I pick 20 pounds a day, you pick 19 pounds, I'm okay. We're right there.
Yeah. So I that's where I'm at. I think that, like you said, it might be a deal where somebody catches a really big bag one day, catches a 17-pound bag the next day, then catches, who knows? I think it'll be up and down a little bit, but I think somewhere around that mark is going to be where it's at.
Last kicker question before I let you go. Will the day three leader close it out and win on the final day?
Hard to tell at this point, but I'm going to say no. I'm going to say, based on what I saw at the Open last year,
Second
I
to
think,
10th, someone's going to come back. Okay.
yeah, I could easily see it being a comeback tournament, because I think, if I had to guess, I think the weights will be really tight going into the final day, and I think that that's going to make it for a really, fascinating final day, compelling. That
Like
there'll
the
be
leader doesn't even have to suck. It could just happen that he could get beat.
sure,
He doesn't, he
sure.
won't lose. He just got beat. Yeah.
Absolutely. I could easily see that being the case. And again, just thinking about tournaments in the past at Wheeler, it seems like the the final day always has some dramatics to it, and I would expect that we see that again this time around.
Awesome. Well, the Inside Bassmaster podcast will be back next week, recapping Wheeler, talking a little bit of Eufaula, Oklahoma, some other things as well, and then we'll be back on the train for Smith, and we'll be 3/4 of the way through the season, Kyle. And are you going to cover the Open at Eufaula, Oklahoma?
Not unless somebody tells me I have to go, because at this point I don't think I have to.
Okay, we'll
I'm
keep it
gonna
quiet then. We'll keep it
I'm
quiet
gonna
then.
I'm gonna produce for the website and help manage things on the back end here in Birmingham, and then I'll be at Smith. So I wouldn't say it's a week off, because it's certainly not a week off, but a week
Hey,
off from traveling.
you get 3 weeks straight in the state of Alabama. That's something and you only get in December, but 2 of those weeks will be working. So we'll keep you in our thoughts. Um,
I'm
awesome.
not
Well,
complaining.
the Whataburger Bassmaster Elite at Wheeler Lake on the Tennessee River kicks off this week. Like we mentioned, live coverage throughout. I should have keyed it up with this. We will be on National Fox, Big Fox, FOX, no numbers after it, Sunday, for part of our coverage in the afternoon. So it should be a good summation of our week as we are close to crowning a champion. And we'll have coverage on Bassmaster.com and other places throughout Thursday, Friday. We'll be on FS1 and stuff as well on Saturday. So Wheeler Lake, 6th stop of the Elite Series, almost back to back in Alabama with Smith Lake. We know if you haven't caught him yet, you better catch him this week.